Welcome to What If Mr. Kennedy Cashed in Money in the Bank successfully. Now, I have done every other successful Money in the Bank, and over the weekend, I will crop it out to do the individual. So, what if Mr. Kennedy cashed in his Money in the Bank? Well, first off, he's got to not be injured because he was diagnosed with uh, a torn something, like his pec was torn or something. So, they diagnosed it right. He's doing the thing, and we'll take you into the story now. This timeline, you could have Edge and Kennedy still doing the Money in the Bank thing, or you don't have to. But I'm gonna say Kennedy defeats Edge to retain the briefcase and then cashes it in on Undertaker. Same way, Batista steel cage match, Mark Henry attack, and Mr. Kennedy is now the new World Heavyweight Champion by defeating the Undertaker. Before I forget, all images were found on Google and copyright to the right person. But now we're 1 week after, and now Batista and Kane are having a contenders match for the World Heavyweight title. Mr. Kennedy attacks both of them, causing a no contest. But Teddy Long, hopefully he's the general manager here. I didn't research that, but I think he is. He's like, play. Oh, is it actually Vicky Guerrero? Well, one of them comes out and says, "Excuse me, play. Triple threat match for '07 Judgment Day." I don't actually know who the general manager is at this point, but Cade vows revenge for his brother, The Undertaker. He will be taking home that title for his family. It is Judgment Day '07, and Mr. Kennedy is taking on Kane and Batista in a triple threat match. Batista hits Kennedy with a spear as Kane runs into a spinebuster from Batista. Batista hits the Batista bomb on Kane, and it looks 1, 2. Kennedy grabs Batista off the pin and throws him out of the ring and pins Kane with a mic check. 1, 2, 3. Mr. Kennedy has retained the World Heavyweight title, pinning Kane, and remember that he pinned Kane because that's going to come back on the next slide. Remember I said that Kane was pinned? Well, that's because on this slide, we're talking about Batista's complaining he wasn't pinned. 2 weeks later, they have a match for the World Heavyweight title. Batista hits a Batista bomb on Mr. Kennedy on the outside. Batista throws Mr. Kennedy into the ring at 9 and is counted out like Edge in the real timeline. After the match, Batista hits another Batista bomb and demands a match with no countouts for the following pay-per-view, One Night Stand '07. And that is where we are going to have a steel cage match between these two. One Night Stand '07. It is a steel cage match between Batista and Mr. Kennedy. And Mr. Kennedy escapes the cage to retain the World Heavyweight Championship. And that means Batista has lost this match inside the steel cage of which he requested. Because Mr. Kennedy was able to escape the steel cage, now Batista, Kane, and the Great Khali battle in a triple threat match to determine the next number one contender. And by pitting the Great Khali, Kane is able to win his contendership at Vengeance United Champions to take on Mr. Kennedy for the World Heavyweight title and hopefully get revenge for his kayfabe brother, The Undertaker. This this is the Go Home SmackDown, the very last show before the Night of Champions Vengeance show. Batista and the Great Khali are fighting. The winner will face Kane or Mr. Kennedy, whoever's the World Heavyweight Champion. And the winner, his name is Dave Batista, who now sets his sights on Kane or Mr. Kennedy, whoever is the World Heavyweight Champion. It's Vengeance, Night of the Champions. And we have that Cruiserweight ECW banner, I believe, at this show. Fun fact Mr. Kennedy does defend the World Heavyweight title against Kane, and now he is set for another encounter with the Animal Batista at a time to be announced at a later date. And when I say a later date, remember I said a later date. We are now on SmackDown, and Mr. Kennedy's cutting a promo saying the Great American Bash is such a stupid name. But what do you expect from WCW? He says, "I'm a young stallion. I'm your World Heavyweight Champion. I beat Batista multiple times. You know who mentored the animal? It doesn't matter because they all fall to Mr. Kennedy, who tames all the animals. The evolution is not a mystery. The evolution of WWE is Mr. Kennedy. This is when Ric Flair comes out and said he was the mentor to Batista. And he says, Kennedy might be a little young, but you're not stupid. But you are stupid. Let me rephrase that. So, Ric Flair says Mr. Kennedy is stupid to mock WCW while he is in town. On SmackDown, we have Ric Flair defeating Batista. As they fight, Ric hits a dump to the eye as Batista goes up for the Batista bomb. Ric Flair rolls up Batista with the tights and the feet on the rope. They stare at each other after the match, but Batista hugs Ric and says it doesn't matter if it's you or Mr. Kennedy, I'm getting my world title back. Batista makes it up to the ramp when Kennedy attacks Flair from behind. Batista doesn't immediately run back to Ric Flair's aid, but he does eventually run back, chasing Kennedy off, setting up the Great American Bash for Mr. Kennedy and the Nature Boy Ric Flair. It is the Great American Bash, and Mr. Kennedy retains his World Heavyweight title against the Nature Boy Ric Flair. But Kennedy is not done. He beats down the Nature Boy Ric Flair until Batista makes the save. Because then Batista gets on the mic and says, I beat the Great Khali in a number one contenders match. I gave Ric this opportunity because this is a WCW pay-per-view name. And then he says, at SummerSlam, it all comes to an end, Mr. Kennedy. I will get back my World Heavyweight title and end your reign. For me, for Undertaker, for Kane, for Great Khali, for everybody, including my mentor Ric Flair, who has tried or has challenged you successfully. We are now on SmackDown, and Batista says, for what Mr. Kennedy did to Ric Flair, he demands one more match against him. Kennedy says, yeah, you technically earned it, but I don't think you deserve a world title match. Batista says he wants one last man standing match. If Kennedy wins, Batista's career is over in the WWE. Kennedy asks, clarifying, if I win, that being Mr. Kennedy, you're gone, being Batista. Batista says yes. And he asks, do we have a deal? Mr. Kennedy accepts the deal, and we're heading over to SummerSlam for the big encounter between Batista and Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy. So we're at SummerSlam, and Batista hits a Batista bomb off the stage into a table, and Batista gets up at 9.75, and Mr. Kennedy is down and out. So I do want to bring up some points at this point, but in the reality of what we'll call the professional wrestling, Mr. Kennedy is kayfabe injured, and he was carted off. But there's a reason why that happened. I said in the last slide that Kennedy is kayfabe injured, but why is he kayfabe injured? Because in the real timeline, he was suspended for the wellness policy. Failing the wellness policy test. I think he was suspended this week. So in the real time, he's like a week or two late because he had to drop the World Heavyweight title in this timeline. He will return at the No Mercy pay-per-view, at the SmackDown after the No Mercy pay-per-view. So No Mercy happens. No Mr. Kennedy. I believe he was there in the real timeline, but not in this timeline. He will return the Friday after, and that's where we're going to pick up the story right now. I admit it. I know some of you don't remember that Matt Hardy and MVP were the tag team champions, and that's okay. They lost the titles to Deuce and Domino, but not in this storyline because when they give the open challenge now, Mr. Kennedy returns with the Great Khali at his side to win the WWE Tag Team titles. And Kennedy says, both me and my pal, the Great Khali, have problems with Batista. I have beat Batista before, but this time, for me, I need to regain my World Heavyweight title. And then Mr. Kennedy looks at the Great Khali, or you, one of us, is on a mission to make sure that Batista is not the World Heavyweight Champion. But then the lights go out, and the Undertaker is standing behind Mr. Kennedy and the Great Khali, attacking both of them. They beat down, that being Khali and Kennedy, beat down the Undertaker until Batista makes the save. Because I don't know why I wrote this, but Batista makes a lot of saves. Mr. Kennedy and the Great Khali, the tag team champions, take on Batista and the Undertaker. Batista hits a. So let's review that. Kennedy and Khali are the tag team champions. Batista and Undertaker are actually in a feud. I think in the real timeline here. But we're doing things different because Batista hits a spear on Kennedy. As Batista gets up, Khali hits a Khali chop to Batista. Undertaker strikes rapidly, and then clotheslines Khali over the top rope. Taker goes for the old school on the apron, but Khali counters into a chop. Kennedy, meanwhile, is faking a rib injury as Batista gets on the ropes. Khali, I guess he's coming in through the middle rope, and Khali hits the Khali chop, and Kennedy hits the mic check for the 1-2-3. Kennedy has pinned the World Heavyweight Champion, and you know he is going to want a World Championship match. But do you remember in this timeline what is about to happen? Because then you'll know exactly where I'm going with this. It's the following week on SmackDown, and it is announced that Batista will put his World Heavyweight title on the line against Mr. Kennedy, the Great Khali, or The Undertaker because of the Cyber Sunday stipulation. And you know Mr. Kennedy is pissed off that the fans can vote for him. So him and Khali attack The Undertaker backstage, and eventually, well, they search for him and then they attack him. And then Batista finds The Undertaker out cold, and he said he has to eventually get his hands on Mr. Kennedy. But he is looking forward to his World Heavyweight title match first against Batista, who says, out of the three options, I want to face you, dead man. So who'd you guys vote for? Well, you didn't vote for a heel. You voted for a face, and there's only one face in this match. The Undertaker. As Mr. Kennedy and the Great Khali try to interfere, Taker chokeslams Khali, and Batista spinebusters Mr. Kennedy, and that takes them out of the match, leaving enough time for Batista to hit the Batista bomb for the win, retaining the World Heavyweight title over The Undertaker. So Kennedy is out, pissed off again, saying that Batista tried to mangle him. He deserves a rematch for his world title, one-on-one. Meanwhile, the Miz and John Morrison challenge the Great Khali and Mr. Kennedy for the tag team titles. When the lights go out, John Morrison hits the flying chuck, and The Miz hits the reality check to pin Mr. Kennedy. They are the new tag team champions, which is a few weeks later than the real timeline. I still want to put the titles on Miz and Morrison because they did great with it. We are now at Survivor Series, and Batista retains in a fatal four-way match against the Great Khali, Mr. Kennedy, and The Undertaker. He does pin Mr. Kennedy, which stops all of Mr. Kennedy's world title aspirations. This is the end, my only friend. Please don't click on the video. There's actually a little bit more, but the end is Armageddon. And Batista retains against the Great Khali, while the Undertaker finally gets his revenge and defeats Mr. Kennedy for stealing his World Heavyweight title in the first place. And guys, that's where the end of the Armageddon also comes for Batista and the Undertaker, because now this story is going to solely focus on Mr. Kennedy. Kennedy. We we are now in the Royal Rumble. The Great Khali goes for the Khali chop, but Mick Foley ducks and Khali hits Mr. Kennedy. Mick Foley hits a low blow on the Great Khali and puts Mr. Sacco, the mandible manclaw, into him. Undertaker tosses Khali over the top rope, and then Mr. Kennedy. So there was a little friction here between Mr. Kennedy and the Great Khali. Let's see if that's going to be a thing that continues on. JKLOL, my memory had failed me. Undertaker is here till, well, I think this is the last time we're going to see Undertaker because I think the last slide is all about Mr. Kennedy. So, Mr. Kennedy replaces Batista, who's the World Heavyweight Champion, and he eliminates Finlay in this storyline. But as much as the Great Khali and Mr. Kennedy were working together, they did have their moments, and we've been seeing this over the couple weeks on SmackDown, where they're starting to have too much tension between each other, which leads to a match at WrestleMania. Before we talk about WrestleMania, I did think of something while I was recording this video I would like to discuss. I am in the 2018 SmackDown Moment Hall of Fame, and ha 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 ha, Mr. Kennedy, Circuit 2013, was also inducted in the same class as me. I'm going to read right off the SmackDown Moment website what exactly this joke is. This is used when somebody laughs at a joke that they don't understand, which is kind of me in this situation because this is the first time I'm reading this. It references a time when somebody laughed at a picture of Mr. Kennedy that said, Mr. Kennedy looks like Mr. Anderson, when everybody else had moved on, laughed at that many minutes ago, and were laughing about something else. But that person didn't want to feel left out of the joke and laughed hysterically at the Kennedy picture to compensate. What were we laughing about instead? Something stupid, breathing heavily into the microphone. And of course, it says this joke was inducted into the SmackDown Moment Hall of Fame, class of 2018, which I am also in as a fan appreciation. So let's go back to the final of when Mr. Kennedy cashed in Money in the Bank. He defeats the Great Khali, and he goes on. These two go on different brands. Now, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with poor old Mr. Kennedy from here on out, but he might stay in the company a bit longer because uh, he's not injury prone to this one. Well, he could get injured again, but like we don't know. I'm going to put Kennedy on the brand with the Intercontinental title because now, if you look at something what I did, he's been United States champion. He's now been a tag team champion, and now he's been a world champion. So he has only the Intercontinental title to go after. If he wins it or not, that is not up to me because this is a world that I do not know too much about. Well, I mean, I'm writing it, but like you get the point. Um, this is another fantasy booking. So if you wanted a part two, I would just put him winning the Intercontinental title and maybe dropping it. I would have to actually look at the Intercontinental title lineage around this time before I would actually make any decisions. But thank you for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and stay nice for disability rights.